Freddy Peralta and Nolan McLean will find themselves at the top. Who follows them? That is very much up in the air. We'll try to get to the bottom of it here today on another edition of the Believe in Mets pod. Chris Schubert, Jack McKessie back with you to talk all things New York Mets. David Stearns settled down. No more big moves in the last couple of days, so we can take this opportunity to take a step back and look at what Freddy Peralta will mean for the rest of this Mets rotation in 2026. Jack, how are you, my friend?
Chris, I'm good. I'm looking over here at the Fangraphs projection of the Mets starting rotation. It looks a lot prettier with Freddy Peralta at the top, but I'm still seeing several question marks in the form of some of the names further down on the depth chart in the rotation, and I'm wondering what the Mets' end result will be going into 2026, what this rotation is going to look like, if it'll be 5 men, 6 men, if Jonah Tong and Christian Scott will be on the Major League roster in a capacity. That's kind of what I'm still thinking about looking at this rotation right now.
Yeah, and I want to start with the question that you posed, whether it's going to be a 5-man or a 6-man rotation, because if you go to Fangraphs right now, and Fangraphs and their projected rosters are not the be-all, end-all, but they're a good guide. They're a good roadmap for us to start this conversation. I find myself worrying at the idea of a 6-man rotation, not because of the names that are listed here. Freddy Peralta, Nolan McLean, David Peterson, Clay Holmes, Sean Manaea, Kodai Senga. That's not the part that worries me. It's the fact that when you go down to the next section, which is projected bullpen, they're one name short because the spot is filled by the 6th man of the rotation. And the back part of that bullpen has a lot of question marks. And I think if I had to lodge one complaint about the Mets rolling into 2026 with a 6-man rotation, it would be that I am very afraid of a rehash of where we were in the middle of the season last year. A rotation that couldn't go deep into games. Now, okay, you maybe can make the case you solve this by Freddy Peralta and Nolan McLean at the top of the rotation. Clay Holmes was a symbol of consistency throughout the year. David Peterson was really good in the first half of the year in giving you length. So you've got 4 guys right there. If Manaea and Senga don't give you length on the back end, you'll be able to protect the bullpen. Okay, but McLean's only 8 starts in. Freddy Peralta is new to the team. What does year 2 of Clay Holmes look like? You can ask all these questions, and I don't want to get to the middle of the season next year and be worrying about getting 4 or 5 innings. I mean, how often did we come on here to do series recaps and talk about how, Griffin Canning only gave the Mets 4 2/3 and 5 innings, and they needed 16, 17, 18 outs from the bullpen, and the bullpen got taxed. I don't think the Mets bullpen is as strong as it was in recent years in terms of the quality of options both on the big league roster and in AAA. And I just worry about, repeating the same mistakes that in large part doomed this team when we got to the second half of last year. That's my only reason for not wanting a 6-man rotation going into next year.
I think a significant part about the 6-man rotation projection here, too, is the Kodai Senga element of it all, right? The Mets, ideally, when Senga's healthy and he's on, like having him get that extra day of rest, kind of going back to what he was doing when he was playing in Japan with more of a 6 days to a week of rest rather than 4 or 5 days. And Senga's, I think, probably the biggest question mark as I'm looking over at this depth chart here is the last 2 seasons he's been hampered significantly by an injury where we had that one start in 2024, which we will always have.
Always have it.
But ended short with an injury. Pretty much ended his season. He made a couple postseason appearances that didn't pan out great. 2025 started fantastic and then cut short, kind of, with another injury, and then was never the same when he returned. And I'm sorry, my Fangraphs just went to virus scanning. But when you look over...
Fangraphs, what are you doing?
At the rotation, you're also noticing that there are some names missing here with Christian Scott and Jonah Tong down in the AAA rotation. And I'm just wondering about how do the Mets balance this idea of needing to develop guys and bring them up to participate at the major league level on a consistent basis, like your Christian Scotts and your Jonah Tongs, but also balance having Kodai Senga and Sean Manaea as looming question marks in the rotation where their injuries with Manaea was the loose bodies in his elbow, with Senga was the leg injury. How is that going to affect them going into 2026? How are they going to address those questions before the season starts, and what is this rotation ultimately going to look like? I think what I keep going back to, Chris, is the idea that these things tend to work themselves out. We've seen for years the Mets having this extra rotational depth, and a lot of times injuries in spring training, any kind of hiccups that could happen along the way will solve themselves, and the Mets will have their solution maybe laid out for them. But as I'm looking at things right now, it seems very crowded, and a lot of the crowding is from pitchers that have more questions than answers outside of really Freddy Peralta at the top.
Yeah, and I'm not so much worried about Scott and Tong as the season plays out, right? Tong, I thought you saw all of the upside that he could provide, but he was not a finished product when he came up here at the end of last year. That felt, I don't want to say rushed, because the Mets clearly felt like he could handle it, but he needed to work. There are things that he needs to correct in his game. Scott is coming off of major surgery. Do you really want to go into 2026 saying, hey, Christian Scott, you're our number 4 starter and you're supposed to help us win a division? That's not really the ideal place for a guy coming off of Tommy John surgery. You want him to be in the lowest leverage, lowest pressure environments to ramp back up. So Tong and Scott starting in the minors, I think, is perfect if you ask the New York Mets. If David Stearns could drop us on opening day and they get through spring training and they don't have what happened last year with both Minaya and Montas going down within days of each other, they'll take it. They'll take Tong and Scott being their top 2 options in AAA if and when they need them. When you look at this rotation, Freddy Peralta has been great over the last 3 seasons, right? And if you want to maybe not just solely focus on last year because it was the best year of his career and it's kind of an outlier in some regards, okay, over his last 3 years, he's been a frontline starter. Nolan McLean, those 8 starts were excellent. That the only knock you can have against McLean, this is the top pitching prospect in all of baseball. MLB Pipeline just put out their top 100. McLean inside the top 10, number 6 overall prospect, the top pitching arm. Made 8 starts. The only knock is he's only made 8 starts. That's it, because those 8 starts were brilliant. David Peterson, a great a great first half, a bad second half. Clay Holmes, I think we warped our brains throughout the course of the year with Clay Holmes because of how great he was early, and when he hit those speed bumps in the second half, I think it made us think his season was worse than it actually was for a guy who was going from being a closer to being a starter. I have no concerns about Clay Holmes. Minaya, what happens with the loose bodies in his elbow? Can he get his arm slot and the release of both the changeup, the sweeper, all of it back to where he was 2 years ago when he was the Mets ace in the second half of the season? And yes, you add Senga and all the concerns that you have there. The strength of the top of the rotation, including Tong and Sproat, or Tong and Scott, I should say, is solid. I feel really comfortable there. Where I worry is you go to the bullpen. Devin Williams struggled first half of the season in New York with the Yankees. A.J. Minter is coming off of a major injury. Brooks Raley isn't that far removed from a major elbow surgery. He looked great. Everything the Mets threw at him last year was awesome. That's fine. The back end of this bullpen right now is Luis Garcia, who's 39, Huascar Brazaban, who's going to turn 37, and Tobias Myers is basically your swingman multi-inning reliever. There's not a lot of fail-safes right now, and that's why they go out and bring in Craig Kimbrell to see if there's anything left in his arm to add to this bullpen. But that's what worries me about a 6-man rotation, not that Senga has trouble or Minaya has a setback with the injuries and he just never returns to form, because I think the Mets are insulated with Scott and with Tong. The idea of a 6-man rotation and giving that extra day to Senga or the extra day to Minaya to keep him fresh, same thing with Holmes. I mean, the bottom part of this rotation benefits greatly from an extra day, right? You just worry about it shortening the bullpen and asking more of Luis Garcia and Huascar Brazaban or Brooks Raley or A.J. Minter, and I just don't think the Mets can live that way like they did last year, because we're going to get to the trade deadline, and I think they're just going to run out of gas. So there needs to be a new plan, and hopefully Justin Willard has a plan, because a 6-man rotation, to me, I can foresee problems in the middle of the season with this bullpen.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I keep going back to the thought that these things kind of tend to shake themselves out in one way or another. I don't think that the Mets are going to end up going into the season with a 6-man rotation for all the reasons that you said. I just think that looking at the bullpen and remembering last year how the taxation on guys like Reed Garrett and Daniel Nunez landed them on the IL and are not going to be playing at all in 2026 because of the injuries that they sustained. And you look at some of the names in the rotation that the Mets currently have. Nolan McLean is probably at the top of the list as far as guys that I have faith in getting length, getting deep into games, and limiting the taxation on the bullpen. Because, Chris, you look at Freddy Peralta, and yeah, he's an ace-level pitcher. Yeah, his stuff is amazing. Yeah, he gets a lot of strikeouts. He walks a lot of guys. And despite making 30 starts each of the last 3 seasons, he crossed 175 innings one time. And part of that, I think, is because the Brewers have had a very good bullpen, and they're able to rely a little bit more on their bullpen. If Freddy Peralta gets 6 good innings, they'll pull him. They won't push him even if he's at 90 pitches or whatever because they have the bullpen to do it. I just don't know that the Mets are there yet. And you think about Peralta with his tendency to walk guys. Clay Holmes is now pushing into his second season as a starter. You wonder what the taxation on his arm is going to look like after being a closer for so long. David Peterson, you wonder if you're going to get the first half version of him where he's able to get deep into games and save your bullpen, or the second half of the season version of him where he struggles through 4 innings. And like you said, Chris, it just starts to weigh on this bullpen and the cracks start to show. And you get to July, August, September, and all of a sudden the bullpen is completely falling apart. The starting pitching is not getting you the innings and the length that you need outside of Nolan McLean, and the Mets can have a lot of issues there. And so that's why I think this will ultimately result in a 5-man rotation, because they're going to need the additional arm and the help in the bullpen, because I just have so many questions about the length and the depth capabilities of the guys in the rotation, all 6 of them, honestly.
And not only that, but one of the other reasons why you bring in Freddy Peralta is so that he can be an ace at the front of your staff and make those 30-plus starts, and a 6-man rotation limits the amount of times you get to use Freddy Peralta. And as we sit here right now, this is just a 1-year rental. So you want as many Freddy Peralta starts as humanly possible because you feel like he's your best pitcher and he gives you a chance to win every time he goes out there. He made 33 starts last year. In 30 of them, he finished at least 5 innings. Think about last year and how many times in the 4th or 5th inning we were on eggshells wondering how the Mets were going to get through a game. In 30 of the 33 starts where Freddy Peralta took the baseball, he got at least 5. Now, the worrying sign is in only 2 of his starts did he get an out in the 7th inning. He went 6 2/3 in July against the Nats, and he went 8 innings early on in the season, April 2nd. He went 8 innings, 1 run allowed against the Royals. That's it. Every other start, he's got a bunch of 6-inning starts, a bunch of 5-inning starts. So the deep 7+, 8+ isn't something that is regular, but he had 13 starts of 6 innings or more last year. All but 3 of his starts were at least 5 innings. The Mets need that guy out there as much as possible, not only to protect the bullpen in terms of how much they're used, but also you want Freddy Peralta to pitch like that as many times as possible, and a 6-man rotation takes his 33 starts down to, 27, 28, and those 5 starts could be the difference between this team winning the division or losing the division. And so I think these are the fine margins that the Mets have to figure out. And again, I understand the reason why a 6-man rotation is super attractive, because it's a hedge. It's a hedge against McLean. It's a hedge against Peterson's second half rearing its ugly head. It's a hedge against Clay Holmes and his workload in year 2 of this project. It's a hedge against Manaea not being able to be back to where he was 2 years ago. It's a hedge against Senga because, let's face it, we have no idea what version of Kodai Senga the Mets are getting when spring training rolls around. Apparently, he's already back in the States. He's already been working extremely hard. And David Stearns did an interview with Andy Martino and talked about this, that the expectation is that he's going to be a part of this rotation. And so the Mets clearly feel like there's something trending in a positive way there. But the idea is you have all these guys in here to cover for each other's flaws, because you don't assume that everything goes wrong. Maybe one thing goes wrong, maybe 2 things go wrong, and so you have that cover. But to me, I just think a 5-man rotation gives you better protection in the bullpen. It maximizes your ability to utilize Freddy Peralta and Nolan McLean, let's be fair, to their fullest, and it puts your best 5 guys out there. And so I do think, I agree with you that a 5-man rotation is best, which then leaves Peterson, Holmes, Manaea, Senga. You want to throw Tong and Christian Scott in there. 6 guys competing for 4 spots at the back end of this rotation, with the 2 or 3 bullpen spots that are going to be up for grabs.
This has inspired me to go back to thinking about how we were thinking about these young pitching prospects last season. How when David Stearns was in Milwaukee, the Brewers tended to do this thing where they kind of soft-launched some of their younger pitchers. They brought them up, they had them in a bullpen role, then they had them kind of be in a back of the rotation role, and all of a sudden they developed into the aces that the team hoped that they could be. And I look at this rotation right now, and I see 2 names on here with Clay Holmes and Sean Manaea as guys who have experience being bullpen guys. And I almost wonder if the Mets have this vision of, at some point during the season, either Christian Scott or Jonah Tong or both are up in the bullpen in some kind of capacity, and at some point during the season, they might flip spots with Holmes and Manaea. Holmes and Manaea just find their way out of the rotation naturally, but I'm just trying to think about all the permutations and combinations that lead to the Mets have guys in their starting rotation with experience in the bullpen. So if they need that extra help, they can get it from those two, and they have the extra depth in the minors with Christian Scott and Jonah Tong, guys who have played in the major leagues, to come back up and help in the rotation in a capacity further down the road of the season. Because I'm just looking at this, and I just can't get over the idea that at some point the workload and the innings are going to catch up to the guys like Holmes, who hasn't really had more than a full season as a starter, and then Manaea and Senga, who have been dealing with injuries. And so I just, when I think about that, I just think that's kind of the natural progression that maybe David Stearns goes back to his Brewers idea of doing things, having the soft launch of these prospects, even though they have major league experience starting, getting them, let their feet get under them a little bit more, less of a desperation move down the stretch of the season with like Jonah Tong last year, and eventually building them into a rotational role. And then you have the opportunity to demote some of the rotation guys into the bullpen.
I also think the cleanest way to do this is to utilize Christian Scott in the Jose Butto role, or the Max Kranick role, or at certain times last year the Huascar Brazaban role, where they came in and they pitched 1-2 innings, and then in the case of Butto and Kranick, if they went multiple innings, they were down for a couple of days. One, I think that's a good use of Scott coming off of the Tommy John surgery, to not have him inflated innings, because the Mets are going to be really careful of, okay, you're coming off of this injury, you've been out for a whole year, we're not throwing 150 innings at you across both levels, right? You're going to max out maybe 115, 125, and so the Mets are going to be really careful about how many of those innings get utilized down in AAA, making starts every couple of days. And I could see a world where in the second half, as maybe a boost to this bullpen, Scott comes up, and we know that he did this with Corbin Burns in Milwaukee. He did it with Brandon Woodruff in Milwaukee, where they come in late in the season and they're used as relievers, even though their long-term plan is for them to be a starter. And I think that's a good way to protect the health of Christian Scott. In the case of Tong, he feels like if he can have a string of starts down in AAA, where the command is there, he has better usage and better feel for those secondary pitches. Listen, we know what the fastball is going to be. It's going to be elite. We know what the changeup's going to be when it can play off the fastball. There needs to be that third pitch. And I think the moment he shows that, if somebody in this rotation is underperforming, that Tong will be there. And the reason why I at least wanted to do this deep dive today after Freddy Peralta came in is because if you look up and down the rest of this roster, camp's going to break here in a couple of weeks. There's like one spot offensively that everyone's going to be paying attention to, and that is, will Carson Bench make the team or not? The bench is kind of set. Luis Torrens is going to be on this team. Mark Vientos is going to be on this team. Tyrone Taylor is going to be on this team. Like, those are 3 of your 4 bench spots immediately, just right there. So you're going to have one bench spot and who's playing left field. That's it. And the names are pretty obvious of who could potentially play left field. I think there's way more intrigue into who makes this rotation after Peralta McLean. Do they go 5? Do they go 6? And I think outside of 5 names in the bullpen, maybe 4 names in the bullpen, it's going to be a who can pitch the best. And you look at who's going to be showing up to camp. Dylan Ross will probably be at camp. Craig Kimbrell, we know, is going to be there. They've got Austin Warren down in AAA. They've got some names that if somebody can have a good camp, you could have another Max Kranick situation on your hands where guy just absolutely lights the world on fire and has an excellent camp and just dominates every opportunity they get. The Mets have an open spot. Okay, Max Kranick, you're our guy. Who could be this year's Max Kranick? You need an opportunity, which I think there is. I think there's spots open on this team, but you also need somebody to step into that role, and maybe that's Scott. Maybe it is Tong. I tend to think they're going to lean those guys more towards stretching them out to be starters, but we know the Mets are willing to be creative, and this is going to be our first look at Justin Willard and whatever plan he's got for how the Mets are going to operate pitching-wise. So this is fascinating. I'm team 5-man rotation. I do not want to watch another season of this Mets bullpen being shorthanded and being asked to do too much. And I think you just need to go with the 5 guys that you believe are going to be able to hit their floor and keep this Mets bullpen fresh. Because it's not like I look at this group, and I like a lot of this group. I like Luke Weaver because of his past closing experience. I like Devin Williams. I think he's going to be a good replacement for Edwin Diaz. I like A.J. Minter and Brooks Raley, right? I like a lot of what they have in the back end. But I'm also the first to admit that I think I like last year's bullpen just a little bit more, just from the sheer magnitude of options. And I don't want to see AJ Minter pitch every night. Like, that's just a recipe for disaster with him coming off of the injury that he had last year. And so you're going to have to manage that too, right? You have to manage Minter. You have to manage Brooks Raley. You have to manage Huascar Brazoban because of the heavy workload utilized for him last year. There's just so many moving parts. And I hope that Carlos Mendoza, when he said, and this was, I think, at Bo Bichette's press conference, that, of course, after a year like last year, you look at everything. You have to find a way to do a better job. I hope that one of the areas the Mets are really trying to prioritize in figuring out how to be better next year is in how they utilize these starters and how they deploy their bullpen. Because I think it, other than the offense going, dormant for stretches, it was the thing that doomed them. They couldn't get enough reliable, quality starting pitching in the second half. I think they've raised the floor there, but I do worry about what they've done to the back end of this pen.
I think it's going to be a massive test for Justin Willard. I think a big reason for letting Jeremy Hefner go, despite how highly touted he is as a pitching coach, was because they needed a change in philosophy with how they work the bullpen, what their plans were for the rotation, how they're going to utilize these new names in the back end of the bullpen. I just think I'm with you. Like the wide range of options they had with Nunez and Garrett and Kranick all being able to do kind of multi-inning roles, Buteau as well. And then losing Edwin Diaz is just a massive hole. Like, I think I'm with you that Devin Williams is going to be a very good closer to replace him, but losing a player of that magnitude is just going to have a ripple effect down the bullpen. And I'm just hoping that with Willard's whatever his mentality, his philosophy, his development capabilities, that he's going to be able to maximize these four guys at the back end of the bullpen. I think it's Weaver, I think it's Williams, Raley, and Minter are your main guys, and then we're going to have to see what the Mets do with the rest of the spots in their pitching staff, because, like you said, I think the offense is pretty much set. The pitching staff I just have so many questions about, even still. Peralta's a massive addition. He anchors things in a way, but there are just still so many questions in the rotation, in the bullpen, and we're going to see how things shake out in the next few weeks as camp gets started here.
Yeah, I mean, spring's going to open, and the last we saw of David Peterson, Shamanai, and Kodai Senga left a bad taste in all of our mouths. That's half of the projected starting rotation for the New York Mets. Now, I expect them all to be better, but that's how we enter camp. We enter camp with big question marks surrounding those three. And maybe we'll laugh in the middle of the season when Luke Weaver and Devin Williams are just an elite back end of the bullpen, and it's just automatic, basically, for a majority of the season. I mean, that'd be great, right?
Yeah.
And do I think it's possible? Yes. And I do think this is one of the more underrated talking points, because everyone loves to dunk on the Mets for all they took another Yankee over to, they stole another Yankee. It's all they do. They just copy the big brother. How many times do we hear the whole, can a guy handle New York? So you now know across town that Luke Weaver can handle New York. You've seen it. You know. You don't have to question whether or not he can handle pitching in the 8th or 9th inning in New York in a big spot. He just did it for the Yankees. So that gives you, it makes you emboldened to go out there and get him. It makes you emboldened to give Devin Williams a 3-year deal, because he was awful for the first half of the season and was getting booed, and it was a disaster, and Aaron Boone did him no favors, put him in terrible spot after terrible spot, and yet he still bounced back and had a great second half of the season. Those are things that I'm glad the Mets are stealing and getting those players from the Yankees, because they're showing that they can handle the bright lights. That's what you should be going out for. So maybe we'll laugh in the middle of the season when those two guys are an elite duo in the back end, and it's all fine. But I do think these are the things. And I'm and maybe this is because of David Stearns and his philosophy, and he's just infiltrated my brain. But because I know there's going to be so much movement throughout the year with this bullpen, this is the part of spring training that excites me. Of I get to throw on a game and I get to see Ross pitch and be like, okay, is he going to make the team? Or Austin Warren, okay, maybe he doesn't make the team now, but he's an option later on in the year. Because there is going to be so much turnover with the last 2 or 3 spots in this bullpen, this is the fun time of year to start watching some baseball. So I cannot wait for baseball to be back in our lives. It's just a couple of days, a couple of weeks.
I'm really excited to watch Mets baseball again. I've gotten all of the 2025 vibes, I think, out of my system. I think this new team with Bichette and Peralta and Simeon and potentially Carson Bench and all these new Mets that are coming in here and changing things up a little bit. I'm very excited to see what the finished product is going to be. But even more than that, I'm excited to see how they figure things out throughout spring training. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what Stearns, Mendoza, and a lot of this changed up coaching staff what decisions they're going to make going forward.
I hope that this episode didn't make you too pessimistic about the future of the Mets pitching staff, because I'm not pessimistic. There's just a lot of questions, and this is the fun time of year to have questions because we'll get the answers as spring plays out. Thanks for hanging out with us here today on another edition of the Believe in Mets pod. If you are new here, please rate, review, subscribe. You know what I say if you're new here? If you're a regular and you still haven't rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast, what are you doing? Hit those buttons. Help us out. If you're watching us over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button over there as well. And if you want to catch the video version of the show, you can do so by going over to YouTube and searching Jack McKessy, McKessy, on YouTube. We are back, a pair of episodes for you next week as we move closer and closer to the beginning of the 2026 season. We'll talk to you guys next time. And as always, let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.